Take this job and shove it.
You are listening to Jobcast Radio, and I am Mike Baumgartner, your Work-Life Survival Sage, Chief Executive Officer of the Work-Life Survival Center, your host and your salvation as far as finding, getting, keeping, surviving a job. If you've got a problem with your boss, if you think you need to sue your company, you've been discriminated against, you think you've been treated unfairly, you think they fired you because of your race, your age, you give me a shout. Let's talk it through. If you think you need help finding a job, I've got lots of ideas. Send me your resume. I will be more than happy to take a look at it. We can talk about it and get you the job that you need. And if you're just having trouble balancing work-life, I've got lots of answers on that. I have had those days when I've done 8, 10, 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, and yeah, it takes a toll on you. And frankly, there are ways to work around that as well. Work-life balance. Everybody talks about it. Nobody takes it seriously. And everybody, who has really, truly a work-life balance is hated by all of us who don't. Well, that's just, that's life. So give me a call. 304-867-4142. Again, 304-867-4142. We've been talking this week all about all kinds of stuff. Our unemployment rate, 8.8%. How do we deal with the rising cost of gas, the commute, all that kind of stuff? And the fact that, let's face it, everybody now is starting to feel that the labor market is coming back. So what happens? Everybody jumps back into the workforce. And yes, there is some hiring going on. But what does that mean? That means it's for some of you, and unfortunately a large number of you, can you imagine what it is like to have been out of work for a year or two and actually get a job? Now, yes, I get it. You're thrilled. You're dancing up and down. All your friends are happy. They probably throw you a party. They get you ready for that first day. But getting back to work after you have been out of work for a year is not easy. It is terrifying. It is frightening. And unfortunately, a lot of people who've been out of work for a very long time, they get back into a job, they don't get back into it as easily as they thought. And unfortunately, sometimes they end up either losing their job or quitting out of frustration. So what do you do? Well, number one, there's a decent article out on the ladders. Again, I talk about the ladders.com. Really nice articles, good writers out there, and I read their stuff daily. This one by Deborah Donston Miller. Go ahead and check it out. Again, the ladders.com. Which, by the way, they're an advertiser on the show. So if you really are looking for a good six-figure job, those of you out there, the ladders, I highly recommend it. They have found me jobs. They're just great people out there. But being out of work is hard. Getting back to work can be harder. Nearly 2 years after unemployment, Rob Smith finally got an offer. It was with a mixture of joy, relief, sadness, and fear that he accepted it. One recent Sunday night, he went to Facebook, updated his status. He wanted to inform his friends and family who had followed his 2 years of unemployment that his ordeal was ending. And he also shared some raw emotions. Quote, anxious and excited about returning to a full-time job tomorrow for the first time in 23 months. Yikes. Now, think that through. You haven't been to work. You haven't had a job. And let's face it, your job search, as I give advice and I tell people, as you are looking for your job search should be a 9 to 5. You should have a desk. You should wake up. You should dress as though you're going to work. You get behind that desk. You search for your job. Very, very few people do it. One of the reasons I tell people to do this is so that when you get that job, it's not like you've landed on Mars. Imagine what it is like to end up having to wake up, get dressed, you get in there. Now, most companies, they understand that it's going to take you a while to ease into the job. That first 90 days, which some companies still call a probationary period, is the time that you kind of ease into it. And they tell you to kind of ease into the job. And I would tell you, easing into the job is a good way not to keep your job. Dive in. Roll up your sleeves, get into it, get used to a hectic routine, because that's what most jobs are. Getting settled in, yes, you have to kind of get your pace. You need to understand you're meeting people, you're setting up your priorities, but you need to be as organized, or actually more organized than you probably were in your job search. Focus on that kind of thing. Now, hopefully, for those of you who don't have jobs, who have been out of jobs for a while, if you have not gotten current, and what does that mean by staying current? It means that you've been reading the newspaper, that whatever your profession is, you've been up to date on whatever laws, regulations, changes, practices, procedures that have been going on. Now, you've gotten the job, so the company thinks that you're current and that you can do the job. But make sure that you are modern. Absolutely. If you happen to be a human resource person, you've been out for a year or two, and you haven't been kept abreast on what some of the new HR laws and new labor laws that have come out, you are in a world of hurt. Finance laws have changed. All kinds of regulations have changed. You need to make sure that you have stayed current. You don't want to go into a job and start asking people who are your peers or people who are working with you, wait a second, what is that law? What is that? When did that happen? Well, it happened while you were out and you were unemployed. That's not something you want to see happen. Go in, make sure that you are staying current on the events and the issues that you are doing. Also, much like learning to swim, you haven't swam for a while, dive in, but don't dive into the deep end. Get swimming, get in, go to work. Don't try to ease in. Quoting from this article, workforce transition requires care and planning, much like the actual job search process, said Tony DeBlau, founder of HR for Change, an information and services resources for individual and business productivity. Quote, if you have been out of work for a long period of time, there are a few ways to ease back into the workforce effectively. The first, don't try to do everything. Like most new jobs, there's a breaking in period for both you and the company, usually 90 days. But that's not to say you should go into your new position with anything but your best foot forward and take it one step at a time. Yes, do not go running toward the brick wall because you will hit it. But definitely at a brisk pace, start performing and raising expectations of the people that you're working with. Dive in, get working. Now, the thing that is going to be always sitting in the back of your mind, and I wanted to spend a fair amount of time talking about this, to those of you who have been out of work, I know the pain. You know the pain. It's been a long, long time. You get a job. Again, there's a lot of relief. You feel good, but one thing you will never, ever feel is secure again. Now, let's just let that sink in for a second. You need to accept the fact. And those of you who are managers, and I get a lot of managers, I know there's a lot of HR people and a lot of companies who listen to this show. Those of you who are hiring people, those employees that you have just hired, that were laid off, that were doing great, that had a career of 10 years, and all of a sudden, poof, they're out of work. Once burned, always burned. Burn wounds do not go away. Sorry to use that rather ugly analogy, but if you've ever gotten burned, you're always scarred. Once burned, always shy. It will always be in the back of your mind, the fear that the next day, no matter how hard you're working, you're going to be told you're fired. And no amount of reassurance, and remember those of you in the job, it's not like you can promise a person a job, or you shouldn't be. But they will always be afraid of that happening. It is a scar that does not go away. If it's happened more than once, it gets deeper, and your employee will always be afraid that somewhere, somehow, no matter how good they're doing, someone's going to put them on a list, and they're going to get laid off. You need to understand that. And those of you who have been fired, I know that pain, and I know that fear. That's why I started this show, was to help people get through all that rejection and that fear that you could be fired at any moment. So do not, please, employers, companies, managers, supervisors, anyone, if you make a joke about somebody losing their job, understand that joke is going to go a little bit deeper than you thought or intended to. So I get it. You know, sometimes it's kind of fun, you know, as a boss saying, look, I'm sorry, but you're fired because you didn't have enough creamer in your coffee or some silly notion or whatever. That is a scary thing. It is a scary scar that people do not get over. Employees, I'm not going to recommend that you go have therapy for this particular fear, but understand that if you are working hard, look, you need to make sure that you have a relationship with your boss. You go to him and you say, how am I doing? Now, if you have a boss that isn't really good about saying that, and there are a lot of bosses out there who are really good at telling you when you screw up, but they're really good about telling you when you're doing things right, go and have a sanity check with him or her and say, how are we doing? Or walk up and say, hey, you going to fire me this week? Now, that may be a bit choking. Don't do it every week, please. It'll just drive them nuts. But you need to make sure that you know that he knows or she knows that they need to at least touch base and that you're doing well. Now, if you have a company that promises there's no layoffs coming up, hey, good. Enjoy that. But, even if they say that, it happens. We'll talk more later.
Take this job and shut it.